Hi, my name is Jose Legaspi, and today I'm going to be presenting my findings in my final project for my Applied Romance Linguistics course at the University of New Orleans this spring 2019. My presentation is titled Online Foreign Language Courses and Oral Proficiency. Before I start, I just want to go ahead and give a bit of a background. This presentation and this research was based off the course textbook titled Teaching Language in Context by Alice Omaggio Hadley, 3rd edition. And ultimately, my project centered in these inquiries. After reading chapter 9 of the book titled Classroom Testing, I was interested in doing research on online foreign language courses and specifically on how they tested oral proficiency. I wanted to be able to answer these 4 questions and present these to you throughout my presentation. The first, are there any benefits and or disadvantages with online foreign language instruction? How do fully online courses test oral proficiency? How realistic is it to yield quality online-based proficiency in a foreign language without any face-to-face interaction? And lastly, are there any progressive approaches to improving world language education? That said, I'd like to take a moment to just inform you all of what propelled this investigation forward. For the most part, when we have a big project or a research assignment, we tend to just want to find the answers. But I wanted to make sure that I had some perspective and some paradigm to go ahead and direct my research a bit more. And I summarized it into 3 big areas. The first, technological advancements. I think that our day-to-day, and this is just my personal opinion and perspective, technology is so immersed in our activities, whether at work, in our social life, in our education. So to not see it, technology as an outlet for potential academic instruction is truly infantile. And according to Fernando Rubio's article, Assessment of Oral Proficiency in Language Courses Beyond Reinventing the Wheel, 2 decades of experience and many pages of research since Nina Garrett questioned whether technology could be seen as directly supporting language learning or simply as an aid to teaching, has left very few in our profession who would question the invaluable role that technology can play to facilitate second language teaching. So, that said, I want to talk a bit about globalization. It's my perspective that globalization, or my interpretation of globalization in terms of this presentation, is more of an understanding of what are men and women of today looking for, correct? We have these individuals who want to be moguls. They want to be individuals that are ready to travel, to go anywhere and sell themselves, be marketable, to either promote their own success and or grow within their own field of study and their profession. So Chin C. Ling and Mark Warsher, in their article Online Foreign Language Education, What Are the Proficiency Outcomes?, talk about how over the last few years there has been an accelerating expansion of online language courses offered both by educational institutions and by commercial organizations. Courses by the latter, those that are free, reach a huge number of learners around the world. Some examples include Duolingo, who had 30 million users as of April 2014, and Live Mocha, which is now owned by Rosetta Stone, had 13 million in 2012. That said, my last propeller was the financial and space constraints. This is probably one of the biggest discussion points in any institution at any level. Who is going to fund this program and where will we host it? Nellick Van Dysenskell, in their article titled Assessing Outcomes in Online Foreign Language Education, What Are Key Measures for Success?, talks about online education and describes it as an environment that provides opportunities for learners to not just access information, but also to interact and collaborate. They state that the instructor may be present in the classroom, may be at a remote location, or have no physical presence at all. So, though this may not answer the real question, it does validate this argument that online coursework can be seen as an alternative, and if not, a direct supplement for face-to-face coursework. Now on to common language. I want to make sure that throughout this my presentation, I don't use acronyms or vocabulary that may seem too vague, so I want to make sure to present that before I continue with my discussion. The first term is achievement tests. These, defined by Clark and Omaggio Hadley, are used to evaluate students' acquisition of certain specific course content. Strictly speaking, a valid achievement test will test only material that has been covered during the course of instruction. A good way of looking at achievement test is that of chapters within our language books or subject topics that we cover and that we test. It's more of a progressional, segmental, periodic, testing where we just test a specific area. We have ACTFL, which stands for the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Languages, EPD, which stands for the Experiential Professional Development, face-to-face classrooms. Now, this is usually written as F2F. It is my definition that these courses, face-to-face classes, are classroom settings where all foreign language activities are presented, studied, practiced, and evaluated in person and on site. Now, hybrid courses are a little bit different. They are a classroom setting where all foreign language activities are presented, studied, practiced, and evaluated in person and on site partially, permitting students and instructors to complete portions online and off-site. We have LCTL, which stands for Less Commonly Taught Languages. We have L2, which stands for Second Language. OMCM, which stands for Oral Computer Mediated Communication. And we have online classrooms. It's my definition that these classroom settings present foreign language activities. They're studied, practiced, and evaluated solely online and off-site. And lastly, proficiency tests. These tests, as defined by Omaggio Hadley, are used to measure an individual's general competence in a second language, independently of any particular curriculum or course of study. So ultimately, proficiency tests would be kind of like a 0.0 examination to see how well you know the language and to what extent can you manipulate your understanding to produce that language in X, Y, or Z setting. Now on to answering my first question. Are there any benefits and or disadvantages with online foreign language instruction? After reading a couple of articles and books, I came to find out that there was about 3 big benefits. However, these were a bit overshadowed by the disadvantages. I would like to talk a bit about the benefits while at the same time talking about disadvantages, just so you don't get too confused. One of the big benefits that is presented with online foreign language instruction is a meaning focused interaction, which, as Rubio presents, many online language courses provide learners with the opportunity to have a live video and or voice exchange with peers and with their instructors through oral computer mediated communication, the OCMCs. Most learning management systems include tools that allow instructors to create virtual rooms to which they can invite students to have live conversations. Some of these examples that we have today include Google Hangout, Google Classroom, Skype, and NetMeeting. That said, one of the disadvantages with this is the synchronous oral exchange and the integration and assessment of spoken interpersonal communication. When it comes to synchronous oral exchange, as Rubio also mentions, the effectiveness of the voice over IP technologies are still not as nimble as the F2F communication and often hinge on computer processor speed and internet bandwidth, and they often suffer from latency issues that affect the quality of interaction. So think about it as having, back in the day in AOL, internet access. It was a bit shoddy at times, but if we're trying to hear and or interpret information that's being given to us as student, or we are giving to as faculty, we need to understand and hope that they are listening and obtaining that information correctly. Now, in terms of integration and assessment of spoken interpersonal communication, we have to talk about the time that it takes instructors to be able to evaluate all of the information that's being processed, right? So if they are able to meet with one student at 3 p.m., well, you have an additional 29 students in your classroom. When will you be able to meet with all of them, correct? If you're going to be doing that assessment of interpersonal communication. An additional benefit when it comes to online instruction is the potential engagement in dynamic assessment. According to Rubio, dynamic assessment is an emphasis on the process rather than the product, and seems particularly appropriate to evaluate learners' interlanguage development in an online context in which process-oriented collaboration is necessary. In other words, a dynamic assessment is more of what we had previously discussed in achievement testing, where we have to make sure that the content that we are presenting to our students is in such a way structured structured in such a way, that we can go ahead and aspire for them to be able to understand the content and put it into practice in future production. Now, one of the disadvantages that comes about with this dynamic assessment is the potential self-adapted structure that we may give to this course. It's commonly known as a one deadline structure, where the student has all semester, quarter, or term, what have you, to complete all the assignments before a specific date. So usually some instructors will assign all 4-5 chapters of the semester or quarter to be due the day before the final. This, as Chin Si-Ling and Mark Warsher present in their article, creates a worrisome discussion because it may shield teachers from knowledge of their students' progress and thereby preclude early intervention where there are problems. Without regular formative assessment, learning relies heavily, arguably too heavily, on students' capacity for self-regulation. So, though we can aspire for this language to be great for the student and structured in such a way that their process of comprehension can be assessed, we too have to realize that if we put into place a self-adapted structure, we really wouldn't be able to track their progress and their knowledge of the specific language. Lastly, one of the other benefits included the least commonly taught languages. And as presented by Van Dusen Scout in their article, there is a concern that there isn't an urgent attention taking place or being given to the least commonly taught languages. They cited Robert J. Blake, who stated that online foreign language education can be especially beneficial for LCTLs, which suffer from teacher shortages, low enrollment, and the financial constraints. He goes on sharing how colleagues from Columbia, Cornell, and Yale have started a collaborative project for the teaching of classical Tibetan, Sinhala, Romanian, and Zulu courses via a synchronous classroom-to-classroom video conferencing model. But here too we have disadvantages such as natural skepticism and the real inquiry of whether we are assessing achievement versus proficiency in these courses. That said, there has been studies that concluded that there's hardly a distinguishable difference between a F2F and an online course. Some of these include Chenoweth and Murday's 2003 study titled Measuring Students' Learning in an Online French Course, where they found that online students in beginning French outperformed offline students in terms of written production as measured by accuracy, use of transitions, overall development, and syntactic complexity, while achieving comparable results in listening comprehension, reading comprehension, grammar, and oral production, as measured by different sections in the final exams. R.J. Blake, N.O. Wilson, M. Cito, and C. Pardo Ballester in 2008 presented their article Measuring Oral Proficiencies in Distant Face-to-Face and Blended Classrooms. They demonstrated that hybrid courses and fully online courses in the beginning and intermediate Spanish yield similar oral proficiency outcomes on the standardized Versant test as did F2F courses. Lastly, NAA Eisenberg's 2010 quasi-experimental study compared online and offline beginning German classes with regards to their learning outcomes. They found that online and offline learners perform equally well in all four of the measures: achievement tests, translation recognition tasks, grammatical judgment tasks, and simulated oral proficiency interviews, or SOPIs, and that improvements in performance on the translation recognition and SOPI tasks were greater among online students though these differences were not statistically significant. So, though we can see these disadvantages and advantages when it comes to online education, we can see that to an extent we are yielding and producing students' capability of language acquisition and language production in such a way that it's almost at the same playing field, right? Face-to-face, in essence, is not better and is not worse than online. Same goes for online. It's not better or worse than face-to-face. Now on to my question regarding how fully online courses test oral proficiencies. After doing some research, I've discovered, thanks to Chin Sing Ling and Mark Warsher, that there's about 4 oral proficiency exams. One of them is the AAPPL, which stands for the ACTFL Assessment of Performance Towards Proficiency in Languages. This is a web-based proficiency exam in interpretive listening, interpretive speaking, interpersonal listening and speaking, and presentational writing. The test takes about 2 hours to complete and is administered via a virtual instructor. We also have Versant, which is developed by Pearson Education and can be administered over the phone or on a computer with internet access. And it takes about 15 minutes to complete. It is available in English, Arabic, Chinese, Dutch, French, and Spanish, and ultimately evaluates the examinee's level of automacy with the language, which is different from the ACTFL OPI, which stands for Oral Proficiency Interview, that assesses 3 models of communication. Here too we have WebCape. WebCape is an online adaptive placement examination designed by Brigham Young University. It's widely used in higher education and is available in Spanish, French, German, Russian, ESL, Chinese, and Italian. It claims to have calibrated the test in accordance with ACTFL proficiency guidelines. However, there's no technical report that can be found on their website. And lastly, we have the computer-assisted screening tool, which is an online oral proficiency test created by the Language Acquisition Resource Center at San Diego State University. There isn't much information, but from what I was able to grasp, it claims to provide similar results as the ACTFL OP, the Oral Proficiency Interview. Now onto my question regarding how realistic it is to yield quality online-based proficiency in a foreign language without any face-to-face interaction. Now that we've learned that I learned that there are proficiency tests out there that students can utilize and institutions can put into place, I wanted to find some research project with statistical data, and I was lucky to be able to find the investigation of Elisa Tognozzi and Huang Trong titled Proficiency and Assessment Using Wemba Voice Technology. Now, before I elaborate more on what the project entailed, I just want to clarify Wemba is a collaborative software program of online communication tools that allow students and teachers to communicate through record voice messages and voice email. Its format is most similar to the computerized OPI, new generation of OCTFL evaluation. So, to my understanding and my interpretation, Wemba is mostly like what we have as Messenger voice messages, WhatsApp voice messages, iMessage voice messages being exchanged between instructor and student for evaluation and feedback in an email setting per se. Now, in terms of this study, it was conducted with two groups of elementary Italian 1 students in the fall quarter of 2007. The test group was of 60 students who were using Wemba, and a control group of 67 students who conducted the same oral activities exclusively in the classroom. So they completed these oral activities in the class with the student-teacher interaction and feedback taking place in the same. At the end of the quarter, both groups recorded an identical final oral exam using the Wemba software. After an inter-rated reliability study was done, a trained rater recorded errors for all speech samples. The final exam was composed of 3 parts. The first assessed the interpersonal mode, as the task required students to answer 4 thematically linked questions on a topic that would have covered in class, and a 5th question that was to be formulated by the student using the formal voice. The second part assessed the presentational mode and required students to narrate something personal about themselves, thus recalling their own life experiences. Lastly, the student was asked to narrate a story based on a series of vignettes that they were provided. In terms of the finding of the study, students who used the Wemba produced a greater number of words, had a wider range of vocabulary, and were more accurate in the word order, and their fluency was much better. With Wemba, students had equal opportunities to respond to the exercises, and teachers could give feedback to individual students through the voice recording capabilities, thus giving individual suggestions on how each student can improve himself or herself through that something that is often not possible in the traditional classroom practice. And lastly, it allowed the student to evaluate their own work. They were able to review the recorded answers before submitting them and improve their oral production following the instructor's comments. Though this sounds great as a great justification for fully online instruction, Catherine J. Doughty, in her article Accountability of Foreign Language Programs, presents some words of caution. She argues that to hold foreign language programs accountable, either F2F or online, in a valid and definable way, we need to begin to develop an assessment framework guided by the following considerations. Those being utility. What are the stated learning goals of the course or program, and do they lead to marketable language skills? Pedagogy. Does the pedagogy embody scientific principles of foreign language learning? Engagement. What is the customer satisfaction, and how easy is it for our students to navigate the web pages or websites that are being utilized? Stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders, and what decisions must they take? Measurement models. If proficiency is the ability to use language for real-world purposes, are the currently employed proficiency frameworks sufficient? And lastly, credentials. Should objective external assessments be given by credentialing bodies such as for teachers, interpreters, health professionals, or business employees? So, though we are excited, or I'm excited to foresee language instruction online, I think this brings us back to earth and makes us realize that though it is great and it is yielding great results for students who are learning foreign languages online, we do have to treat it, if not the same, a bit harsher to an extent of that of a face-to-face classroom, where we have that opportunity for 1 to 3 hours a day to interact with the students and provide them with substantial feedback. In terms of my last question, which asked if there was any progressive approaches to improving world language education, in her article, A Collaborative Approach Can Improve World Language Education, Bridget M. Burke expresses her concern with universities that want to be accredited to prepare world language teachers and how they must meet standards set by the ACTFL, which requires 80% of program finishers who want to teach French, German, or Spanish to achieve an identified proficiency level on 2 high-stakes exams, one in writing and one in oral proficiency. To combat this, she created experiential professional development to allow world language teachers time to experiment in their classroom with the support of a researcher consultant. The experientiary learning outward bound design, inside-out professional development, job-embodied learning, and action research influenced the EPD. Teachers learned a variety of proficiency-based methods, participated in peer observations and peer meetings, and spent time with a researcher/consultant who coached them on implementing the new practices. As a result of EPD, teachers implemented such activities as daily questions, story writing, student interviews, implicitly grammar and vocabulary lessons, skits, improvisation, and computer-mediated communication. So that goes to say, though we want to encourage online education and we see it as a great fruitful area if it is assessed and designed in such a way that allows for fruitful production of that language, we as instructors have to be willing to provide and engage in these professional development trainings such as that provided by Bridget M. Burke, to make sure that we're up to date with information and valuable practices that can improve not only our personal and professional skills, but the skills of our students. To conclude, I'd like to sum up some of the things that I've learned and what I hope you all take away from my presentation as well. I feel that all my inquiries, my 4 initial questions, were answered through my research. I was able to study benefits and or disadvantages with online foreign language courses such as meaning-focused interaction and self-adaptive structure. I presented at least 3 studies in which they concluded that online courses yield the same, if not slightly better, oral proficiency. I introduced at least 5 various oral proficiency examination with the presentation of a research project from Elisa Tognozzi and Huang Trong, including AAPPL, Versant, WebCape, Computer-Assisted Screening Tool, and Wemba. And lastly, I was able to showcase progressive examples to improve world language education with Bridget M. Burke's experiential professional development trainings. I hope that after watching this video, you too have learned a bit more about oral proficiency and how it looks in today's online educational setting. Before I finish my video, I'd like to go ahead and just present my references. That said, thank you so much for watching.